Thank you. It's nice to be back at university. I've actually got a story from university. I was at Warwick 8 years ago. I was coming back from a lecture. It was quite dark, and there was 3 big white guys. They looked like skinheads to me. My first instinct was there's going to be some trouble. They were calling me, took out my headphones, started speaking to them. And they were asking me what I was studying. So I was going through all my modules: race, ethnicity, migration, history of Africa, political economy. And one of them said to me, "For a working class idiot like me, mate, what does any of that mean?" And I stopped him and I said, "You're not an idiot because you're working class. Actually, you probably have a better understanding of the world and society compared to a lot of the people that I study with, who went to private schools, who had a very sheltered existence." And we actually bonded over the fact that we were both working class people. And we started talking about the elites, we started talking about inequality, we started talking about our backgrounds. I'm from Luton, they're from Coventry, deindustrialization, all sorts of topics. We had a great conversation. And at the end of it, one of the guys said to me, "You're sound, mate. Don't let the Marxist professors brainwash you." That man was more of a Marxist than my professors. I can say that for certain. But my point is, people don't neatly fit into the left and right divide. We like to think that we can separate out society into reform, Labour, Green, Independent, and that's that. And actually, if we want to win, we have to start thinking about how do we win people over like that. How do we break down the barriers? How do we find commonality? And how do we build working class unity? The fact is, a significant chunk of working class people are voting for reform. Recently, County Durham Council, the place where we have the Durham Miners Gala associated with the British left, it went reform. If you go to many of these former mining communities, you see poverty, you see a lack of social infrastructure, you see the destruction of industry and communities built around industry. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of despair. And it's in many of these working class communities, predominantly white working class communities, where we're seeing an increase in racism, an increase in support for the Reform Party. And this is a problem. And we're not going to solve that problem by calling people names, by rejecting them, by making generalizations. There are hardened fascists who pose a threat to people like myself. There are others who are being influenced by the right, and we have to win them over. And I think it's really, really important that we reflect as a movement in terms of how we do that. Because we could end up in a situation where we have more Green MPs, more left-wing Labour MPs, more independent MPs, but we could still have a reform government. And what will that government actually mean? Because Nigel Farage, people forget, he once said, he was the only politician in Britain keeping the legacy of Thatcherism alive. Because that's what they stand for. They are Thatcherites. They might have the support of a significant section of working class voters, but they will destroy trade unionism in this country. They will spread further racism. They could significantly reduce migration. And when our problems are not fixed, they will ramp up the Islamophobia. It'll be multiculturalism. And that's the basic playbook. It's always a simple narrative that says they care about those people over there, but they don't care about you. And if you look back at history, the way they spoke about the Jewish community, the Irish community, the West Indian community, the South Asian community, it's the same way they're speaking about the asylum seekers, that these people are being privileged and the white working class are being neglected. Now, we know that the working class is not just white, it's multicultural. Is multi-faith, is multi-ethnic. In fact, if you're a person of color in this country, you are disproportionately working class. And I believe the best terrain to fight a party like Reform is the terrain of class. Because ultimately, we actually believe in class politics. We need class politics. Because in towns like mine, where nearly half the kids are growing up in poverty, where we've just lost the Vauxhall factory, which provided secure jobs for people like my dad, we're seeing the impact of the ruling class economically exploiting us. And so, yes, while we need to talk specifically about racism, we also have to address material concern. Because until we address the economic circumstances that are being exploited by the right, they will continue to do what they do. And we can see that throughout our history. On the topic of racism itself, I think it's really important to emphasize what has been happening over the last few years, because it's not been equal. Where you live has determined how you've been impacted by racism, and it's the smaller, more geographically isolated ethnic minority communities that have been on the receiving end of an increase in hate crime. And that's why, as a movement, we need to think strategically about where we are applying our time, energy, and resources. We can have huge demonstrations in the big cities where ethnic minority communities are less likely to be threatened. But what about those more isolated communities that I've been to, actually, and spoken to Muslim women in places like Basildon, in Essex, where they tell me that when they try to cross the road, cars are speeding up at them. While they're taking their kids to school, they're being called scum and the P word. This is what is happening in 2026. It's not being reported on much in the British media, but it is the impact of these racist narratives. Now, my dad lived through an era where there were certain roads you couldn't walk through as a black or Asian person because you get your head kicked in by racist thugs. The reason I can walk through comfort in a street like Luton is because our community is organised. They didn't sit and take it. They didn't stay at home when the fascists were marching on the streets. They came out and they fought back. They organised their communities. And they didn't just organise as black and Asian people, they organised as a class. There were many white working class people alongside them. When I was 12 years old, I was told you can't go into the town centre because the English Defence League were in town. And it was English people, white English people, that I saw on those counter demonstrations. So when someone like Stephen Yaxley Lennon says he speaks for the white working class, come to Luton and speak to the white working class, and they'll tell you how much they reject his nonsense. So we've got to try and figure out how we build working class unity, to try and understand that the problems in places like Sunderland and Hartlepool and Essex are no different to the problems in places like Brixton and Bradford and Birmingham and Luton. And that's the coalition that we have to build. It's not easy. It won't be done overnight. But it's vital that we do the work of direct engagement with people that we disagree with. I think it's really important also to understand how racism functions, not just as a form of prejudice, but as a political tool. Racism, Islamophobia has functioned as a tool to justify foreign policy abroad, whether it's what's happening in Palestine, the Iraq War, but also draconian authoritarian legislation like the Prevent Agenda, like the undermining of our civil liberties, clamping down on the right to protest. These things would be opposed by masses of people if it wasn't for all of the Islamophobia and the racism that's being used to justify the so-called terrorist threat from people like myself. If you think back to the 2024 riots across Britain, they didn't come out of nowhere. About a year before that, we had a narrative about the mass demonstrations in support of the Palestinian cause. Hundreds of thousands of people marching, calling for a ceasefire, an end to the genocide, putting pressure on Labour politicians and electing independent councillors. It had a real impact. It was a mass movement, and it frightened the establishment. And that's why their smears went into overdrive. You had front page headlines talking about hate marchers on our streets. You had narratives of sectarian voting. You had our Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, re-emphasizing the hate marchers narrative. You had Lee Anderson talking about how Sadiq Khan, the Muslim mayor of London, was controlled by Islamists. And then you have Nigel Farage going on telly saying British Muslims don't share British values. So all of that narrative from the top led to those racist riots. Alongside, of course, the long-standing xenophobia and anti-migrant sentiment that's always been a feature of politics in this country. And so it's very important to understand the connection between the media narratives, the narratives of politicians, their goals, and the racism on our streets. And that's why Tommy Robinson is calling his demonstration around the same day as the Nakba March on, I believe, Saturday the 16th of May, is because he is frightened about those marches. In fact, there was an iPaper investigation a couple of years ago where he spoke about the fact that he was angry that so many people are marching for Palestine on the streets, and he wanted to take back the streets. And so it's very important that we think about that march they're doing on the 16th and think about how we're mobilizing in our communities to oppose them. because I believe that if we don't outnumber these people on the streets, they will be emboldened. I don't believe we are outnumbered by these people. I think we are often out-organized by these people, as the late and great Malcolm X said. And it's really important to think about how we unite the anti-racist movement, the anti-imperialist movement. For me, they're the same thing. You cannot be an anti-racist without being an anti-imperialist. You cannot be an anti-racist without supporting the Palestinian cause. Because what's happening to the Palestinian people is racism, is settler colonialism, is ethnic cleansing. And so we have to unite these fights. We have to address material concern as well. And we also have to reject the sectarianism, the insularism, the identity politics devoid of class that tells someone like me that my interests, align with a Pakistani landlord or a Pakistani boss who's exploitative simply because they're Pakistani. We have to reject that kind of politics and think about how we unify our people, how we unify our class, and how we win. And it comes back to that simple question in terms of understanding how we win. Who is better organized, us or them? Thank you.